Ooh, I was gonna get a piece of Warbler. My visual aids! Hi everybody, welcome back to my craft room. In my last video, I showed you how I made the base of my Aloy Tenakth Dragoon armor, and you can check that out up here. And in this video, I'm gonna show you how I made the machine plate armor. The first thing I had to do for this armor was make the pattern, which, if you can imagine, was extremely intimidating. I was really dreading having to kind of hand draw and scale all of these crazy pieces because that's really all I've ever done before. So I decided to teach myself Adobe Illustrator, and this was huge for me. I can see this opening up a whole new era of cosplay. I was able to take a ton of pictures in the game's photo mode and then just use the pen tool to kind of trace around the lines. And that was how I got my patterns. So if you can teach yourself Illustrator, or maybe perhaps an open source version of Illustrator if you don't want to pay for it, you can absolutely do that. And it was okay. Like, it wasn't too hard to learn. And teaching yourself a new skill for cosplay is always extremely rewarding. I'm actually going to be making the patterns for all of these armor pieces available for free on Patreon. It's totally free. You don't have to be a member or anything. You can just go check those out and download them. I will warn you, since it was my first run at Illustrator, they're a little rough, but I thought that was a good place to kind of permanently have them. So yeah, that will be linked in the description. And with that, let's get started. Before I get into the machine plates, I do have one last armor piece base to make, and that's the chest plate. I'm very inexperienced in creating foam armor patterns from scratch, but that's okay. That's what Kamui cosplay is for. So I used a combination of her corset armor pattern and basic female chest armor as a base. I just printed that out and cut it out so I could transfer it to my foam. My favorite tool for tracing on foam, by the way, is just a regular ballpoint pen, but specifically the kind that can write in 4 colors. It's just my go-to. It works so well. Once I got my patterns marked, I cut them out with an X-Acto knife. And here's what the pieces looked like. Next, I went out to my garage and glued it together, and for that, I'm using contact cement. Contact cement is a construction adhesive, and I would absolutely encourage you to use it outside because it is pretty fumey. You're going to see me using contact cement a lot in this video, so let me give you a quick rundown of how it works. It's a super thin and syrupy texture, which can make it pretty messy. For this top armor piece, I used a scrap piece of foam to spread the glue out, but a silicone face mask tool works really well too. Apply a thin layer of contact cement to each piece you want to glue together and then wait for 5 to 10 minutes. Ideally more like 10 minutes unless it's really hot outside. You want the contact cement to completely lose its glossy finish. Then just smush the 2 glued edges together and it'll stick. Once I let my contact cement dry for a while, I took it back to my craft room to try it on and mark where I needed to trim off some excess. Then I just cut off that extra foam. Next, I installed a zipper to the back of the armor top so I can get in and out of it easily. I used a separating zipper and hot glued it in. You can also use contact cement, but truthfully, I just didn't want to take it back outside again, and this hot glue is pretty strong. Before I cut the zipper, I used that same 6mm foam to make a collar that I heat formed and glued on. Then I cut the zipper, hand sewed a zipper stop at the top, and the armor base was finished. For my armor, I used 2 methods, and the first one is the Warbler and craft foam armor, and this is for kind of the stiffer pieces. Ooh, I was gonna get a piece of Warbler. My visual aids! If you don't know, Warbler is a thermoplastic, and it is commonly used in cosplay. It's basically wood pulp held together with just heat-sensitive plastic, so if you heat it up with a heat gun, you can mold it and shape it, it sticks to itself, and you can reuse all the scraps. It's a really cool material. It's kind of expensive. For this project, I'm specifically using Warbler's black art because there are different types of Warbler. All the pieces that I used the Warbler foam sandwich method on are the headpiece, the belt buckle, the machine plates that dangle from the hips, and the side hook. So let's start with something easy, like the belt buckle. The first thing I did was print out my traced armor patterns and made sure that they were the correct size. Then I traced the base of the pattern onto some 2mm craft foam sheets. Then I cut up my pattern into the segments I traced. What I'm doing is cutting out pieces that I want raised up from the foam base. This is going to create a more layered and visually interesting piece on the cosplay. I like to use different colors of foam to help differentiate between the pieces. Then I took those out to the garage and contact cemented together all the pieces. Here is where the Worbla sandwich part comes in. You take 2 pieces of Worbla and heat them up with a heat gun to get them nice and floppy. Then you take your foam piece and put it between the 2 pieces of Worbla and smush it together. Worbla will stick to itself, so I used the back of a paintbrush to kind of squish it at the edges. I also heated up the Worbla whenever I needed to, but be careful to not overheat it because it'll get bubbles. Then you just cut the piece out. And don't worry, these are my old fabric scissors that I have relegated to Worbla scissors. Then I just repeated those steps with the other side of the belt buckle. And here are the 2 buckle pieces. Worbla sticks to itself, so I heated up the 2 sides, lined them up, and pressed them together. And that's the finished belt buckle piece. Now I'll tackle something a little more complicated, the headpiece. Since this is going to be directly against my head, I printed out a couple of sizes to test out the scale. Oh yeah, this is far too large. If you can believe it, blue tape is not really made to stick to face skin. It does not want to. I still feel like this is going down too far, but this is about perfect. This is exactly how I want it. So I might even print this at 80% and just kind of mix and match the sizes. I think that'll be, I'm gonna try that. Once I got the scale kinks worked out, I did the same foam layering technique on the forehead and face framing pieces and contact cemented the foam together. And just like the belt buckle, I covered everything front and back with Worbla. Now for the fun part, which is shaping the piece to my head. I heated up the forehead piece and placed it on my head in front of a mirror. The piece was hot, but not so hot I was gonna give myself a burn, so just be careful. Then I just held it in place for it to cool down completely. Next, I heated up the inside of the forehead piece very gently so it wouldn't warp, and then stuck the face framing armor pieces to it. This was super nerve-wracking, but it turned out great. The rest of the Worbla pieces are all the same technique, so I'll just go over those pretty quickly. These also happen to be the pieces that attach to the belt. The only thing I made differently was the side hook. That I cut out of 10mm craft foam, and I didn't do a full Worbla sandwich. I just wrapped the edges of the Worbla around the back. This is great if you want to use less Worbla on a piece. The only reason I did a Worbla sandwich for most of these pieces is because I knew that they might be seen from the back, but that is not the case with the hook. So here's all the foam belt pieces. Purple is left side and pink is right side. Then it all just got covered in Worbla, and that was all those pieces finished. The second method I use to make these armor pieces is just foam, no Worbla required. Some of these pieces need to be a little bit flexible, or they need to have like a rounded off corner, which is a lot harder to do with Worbla. And these pieces end up being a lot cheaper because foam is an incredibly cheap material to work with. I'm making the rest of the armor pieces out of just foam. By far the most complex piece of foam armor was the front machine plate. It looks like a dinosaur, and it is very cool, and it's one of the things that made me want to make this armor in the first place. I traced the base of the dinosaur out on 10mm foam so it's nice and thick, and cut it out with an X-Acto knife. I cut out all of the raised details on 2mm craft foam and blue taped it all together before I contact cemented it together. And contact cementing this was an ordeal. So many teeny pieces to keep track of. I found it really helpful to glue the smallest pieces first and work my way up to the biggest ones. Then I cut out and glued together my back armor plates, and these were refreshingly easy after the front armor plate. The leg spikes were easy. The biggest hurdle was just that I had to make 12 of them. They were cut out of 10mm craft foam with 2mm craft foam details on top. I did the arm armor and the shoulder spikes at the same time since they're very similar. I printed out the patterns and made sure they were the right size. Gluing these together was extremely tricky because they were so small. I have right here my little pieces for the arm armor and my shoulder armor, and they have these little spikes. And right now the spikes are kind of open, there's empty space. And I think the proper way to do this would be to, make little craft foam gussets like you would a glove. However, these are so tiny and fiddly that there's absolutely no way. There's just no way. So my idea is to take some foam clay and just shove it up inside here and then use some sculpting tools to kind of just sculpt out the little spikes. I think this is gonna work. And on top of not having to get so fiddly with some glue, I think it will also lend a little bit of strength because they aren't gonna be completely hollow. Okay. So we're just gonna take even less than that. We're gonna take our little foam clay thing, shove it in there, and now a little sculpting tool. And this might help fill in a couple gaps as well. Honestly, this seems to be working just fine. This is great, and for these pieces that need to be a little more open, it should hold them open as well. That's very exciting. All right, all right. I need to go get some water, but something you can do with foam clay if you need to smooth it out is get your finger just get your finger a little wet and just run your finger over it to smooth it out. So I'm gonna do that and keep going on these. Next was the machine plate pieces for the quiver. I cut the base of these out of 10mm craft foam, and then I did something I haven't done yet for this cosplay, which is Dremel. I am out in my garage. I have brought out some of my foam pieces so I can kind of Dremel the edges and make them look a little neater and tidier. I actually cut 2 of these pieces because it's kind of a complex curvy shape and I'm afraid. So let me show you some of the things I have for Dremeling. First, you can see got some safety goggles. Foam is super messy. It's gonna be flying everywhere. I've also covered my area. Anything I don't want like little foam granules to get on, I just have some Dollar Tree tablecloths. That ye old rotary tool itself. I also have a shop vac that I'm gonna use frequently. And then you don't really need a respirator when you're working with foam because it's not releasing like chemicals that you breathe in, but you do need something to block like particles. So just your regular old medical mask should do the trick. This is the Dremeling part of the video. I used it to clean up the edges of the foam as well as to add a gentle curve to any piece that needed it, like the front dino and the quiver armor. My husband took this video of me Dremeling and I look like a shrimp. A shrimp covered in foam particles. And finally, I glued the last of the foam pieces together and it's time to paint. I primed the foam and Worbla pieces the same way using Flex Bond. Flex Bond is made specifically for Worbla and it worked really well. I didn't have to sand a thing. I also liked using it on the foam because it gave everything a similar texture. Everything got 2 coats of Flex Bond front and back. Then out to the garage again for everyone to get several thin coats of white spray paint. This is my favorite part of the whole process, the weathering. This is really where these pieces are going to come to life. See the difference? Some of the armor pieces, like this hip armor, have some red paint details on them, so I used some blue tape to mask off those areas. Then I took red acrylic paint and painted inside of the triangles. I also took a chip brush and roughly brushed the paint to sort of pre-weather the paint. Take the tape off immediately because if you let it dry, the tape can pull up the paint. Then I took some toilet paper and roughly rubbed off the acrylic paint to make it look like the paint has already been just dragged through a post-apocalyptic Forbidden West. Next, I'm taking some oil paint in Payne's Gray, not black. I like oil paint because you can apply it pretty liberally, and since it takes a long time to dry, you can wipe it off and build it up. Acrylic paint just dries way too fast for me to enjoy trying to really make something look weathered. I made sure to apply it on the low points and along all the edges. Then I took some brown acrylic paint and applied it on a few of the low points to make it look like dirt has really settled into the armor. Not too much since I still want these to read as white, but it gives a really cool effect. Now I'm switching over to cheap acrylic paint and a thin brush. I have barely any paint on my brush and I'm just lightly going over the edges to make the paint look like it has been scratched and scraped off in battle. I'm also putting it in any low points that I think need more shadow. This next part is my favorite technique for making paint look like it's flaked off. I just use a silver paint marker. It's super opaque and it offers a lot of control of application. It looks like super shiny bare metal. I think it looks best applied to any edges of the armor, like on the points of the teeth. It's so easy and looks so great. I applied all of those same painting techniques to the rest of the armor. After weathering everything, I just gave it all a couple of coats of satin clear and it was done, and it just looks so cool. I really love how this turned out, and I really love how in the Horizon game universe they just take like all of these really cool the machines from the environment and incorporate it into the armor, and I think it's just really cool design, and I'm really excited to be able to put this on my body. Don't forget that all of these machine armor plate patterns are completely free over on Patreon. That will be linked in the description. Next time I will be going over how to attach all of these armor pieces together and then a few other miscellaneous things. If you want to see more work in progress, I'm on Instagram. You can also find me on TikTok, and if you want to see more long-form YouTube content, make sure you subscribe to me here. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!